The Kalani world of VS Talia, South was burning. Smoke choked the sky, turning the twin moons into little more than crimson blurs in the haze of war. Explosions rumbled in the distance, shaking the ground as Syndicate artillery pounded the last remaining defensive lines. What had once been a thriving human colony was now a graveyard of twisted matter and scorched earth. The Terran Marines were the only thing standing between the civilians and complete annihilation. Sergeant Cole Ramirez crouched behind the wreckage of a troop transport, his rifle resting against the jagged hull. His armor, once pristine, was now a patchwork of plasma burns, bloodstains, and hastily applied field repairs. He could feel the weight of exhaustion settling deep in his bones, but he ignored it. There was no room for weakness, not here, not now. He glanced at the soldiers beside him, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat, their eyes filled with the same grim determination that had defined humanity's warriors for centuries. Incoming! Private Carter's voice cut through the chaos, his rifle spitting blue streaks of plasma into the advancing enemy horde. The chitinous beasts surged forward, their bodies moving with terrifying speed, their guttural screeches a nightmarish chorus of death. Syndicate warriors, towering brutes with shimmering exoskeletons, marched alongside them, their weapons cutting through the night with deadly precision. The Marines returned fire in a relentless barrage, cutting down the first wave before they could close the distance. But there were always more. Hold the line! Ramirez roared, his voice hoarse from hours of barking orders. He fired a controlled burst, the recoil slamming into his shoulder as another alien crumpled to the ground. The barricade they had built from rubble and ruined vehicles was barely holding together. The ground beneath them was littered with bodies, human and alien alike, but there was no time to mourn, no time to hesitate. The evacuation shuttles were still loading the last of the civilians. If they fell now, the entire colony would be lost. A massive explosion erupted nearby, sending dirt and shrapnel raining down on them. Ramirez felt the shockwave rate his ribs as he ducked behind cover. When he looked up, he saw Corporal Vasquez struggling to rise, her left arm limp and bleeding, her rifle still clutched in her good hand. "I'm fine," she snapped before anyone could ask, gritting her teeth as she forced herself to keep fighting. The radio crackled with static before a voice broke through. "This is Evac Shuttle Alpha, 2 minutes until final departure. If you're not on board, you're not getting off this rock." Ramirez gritted his teeth. 2 minutes might as well have been an eternity. The enemy knew the humans were cornered, and they were throwing everything they had at them. Plasma fire seared past, close enough that he could feel the heat on his skin. His rifle clicked dry, and he cursed, yanking a fresh magazine from his belt. The moment he looked up, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A massive Syndicate, easily 3 meters tall, was charging straight for them. Its thick, armored hide was riddled with scorch marks, but it didn't slow. Its 4 powerful arms carried massive plasma cannons, and its mandibles clicked with anticipation. The Marines opened fire, but their rounds barely slowed it down. "Rocket!" Ramirez bellowed. Private Deorn responded instantly, shouldering a launcher and firing a single round. The projector struck the beast dead center, sending a plume of fire and smoke into the air. For a moment, there was silence. Then the monster emerged from the flames, half of its face blown away, but still moving. "Son of a..." Carter didn't finish his sentence before the lunged, impaling Deorn with a single, brutal strike. Blood sprayed across the dirt, and the Marine's scream was cut short. Ramirez didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, drawing his combat knife as he leapt onto the creature's back. His blade plunged into the exposed flesh where armor had been blasted away, twisting deep into the nerve cluster. The let out a final, deafening screech before collapsing, its massive body nearly crushing Ramirez beneath it. The battle didn't stop. More creatures surged forward, but the Marines fought with renewed fury. Vasquez, despite her injuries, threw a grenade into the thickest part of the enemy ranks, the explosion tearing through their lines. Carter switched to his sidearm, firing shot after shot as he covered Ramirez. The countdown was closing in. The radio crackled again. Shutters leaving in 30 seconds. Get your asses in gear. Ramirez wiped blood from his visor and turned to his squad. Fall back. Move now. They moved as one, firing as they retreated. The barricade collapsed behind them, overrun by alien bodies. The ramp of the shutter was already lowering, and the engines roared to life. The last remaining Marines sprinted toward salvation, their boots pounding against the dirt. As the ramp began to close, Ramirez turned for one final look. The battlefield was a burning wasteland, filled with the bodies of his fallen brothers and sisters. The enemy forces were still advancing, but they would be too late. With a final leap, Ramirez made it onto the shutter, collapsing against the cold metal floor. He could hear Vasquez panting beside him, Carter muttering a curse under his breath. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "We're clear. Hang on." The ship lurched as it ascended, leaving the colony behind. Ramirez let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of exhaustion set in. They had held the line just long enough. The mission was over. But he knew, deep down, that the war was far from finished. The shutter's interior was dimly lit, the hum of the engines the only thing breaking the silence as it hurtled through the upper atmosphere of Viestalia, South. The battered Marines sat in exhaustion, their armor scorched, their weapons low on ammunition. Sergeant Cole Ramirez leaned against the bulkhead, eyes scanning his squad. Vasquez clutched her wounded arm, her face pale but defiant. Carter sat hunched over, head resting against the cool metal of the cabin wall, while Darius checked his rifle out of habit, though they all knew it was useless for now. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and burnt ozone. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the gnawing weight of reality. They had made it out, but at what cost? A sharp beep from the cockpit broke the silence, and the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "Brace yourselves. We've got incoming." The words sent a jolt through the exhausted Marines. Ramirez pushed himself to his feet, gripping the overhead railing as he moved toward the cockpit. Through the reinforced glass, he saw the dark void of space, punctuated by the swirling mass of the Beta still raging in a orbit. Human ships, sleek and angular, weaved through the firestorm of Syndicate warships, exchanging devastating salvos of plasma and fire. Some of their ships were already burning, their wreckage tumbling toward the planet below. Enemy fighters on an intercept course, the reported, fingers dancing across the controls. 3 no, 5 of them. Fast movers. Ramirez's stomach tightened. The shutter was built for transport, not combat. Its only defenses were a pair of light turrets and whatever speed the engines could muster. If those Syndicate fighters got within range, they wouldn't stand a chance. Evasive maneuvers, the pilot said, gripping the controls. "Hang on." The shutter banked hard to the right, gravity shifting as the inertial dampeners struggled to compensate. The Marines grabbed onto whatever they could, the sudden movement jarring their already battered bodies. A bright streak of energy zipped past the plasma fire from the enemy fighters. Carter cursed. "We just got out of hell, and now we're flying straight into another van." Vasquez gritted her teeth. "We need a miracle." Another volley of plasma blasts seared toward them, the pilot rolling the shutter just in time to avoid a direct hit. The cabin was filled with the sound of warning alarms, red lights flashing as the shields flickered under the strain. The swore under his breath, fingers frantically working the controls. "Shields at 30%. We can't keep this up." Ramirez grabbed the pilot's chair, leaning in. "Can we make it to the fleet?" The pilot shook his head. "Not before they tear us apart." A sudden explosion rocked the ship, and for a moment, Ramirez thought they had been hit. But as he looked back out into space, he saw something streaking toward them from behind. A pair of Terran starfighters, sleek and deadly, their engines burning bright as they closed in. "This is Eagle Squad," a calm, authoritative voice crackled through the comms. "We've got your back." The lead fighter, 80-90 Viper, roared past the shutter, unleashing a storm of rounds that tore through one of the Syndicate fighters, sending it spinning into oblivion. The second Viper engaged another enemy, its missiles locking on before delivering a fiery explosion that consumed its target. Cheers erupted from the Marines as the Syndicate formation broke, their remaining ships veering off to avoid destruction. The shutter shuddered as it powered forward, slipping into the protective sphere of the Terran fleet. Ramirez let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had made it. The pilot exhaled in relief. Thanks for the assist, Eagle Squad. Anytime, the fighter pilot replied. Now get that shutter to the Valor before they send more company. As the shutter made its final approach, the massive form of the Valor loomed ahead, a Terran battleship, its hull scarred from combat but still standing as a testament to human resilience. The hangar bay doors yawned open, welcoming the battered Marines home. The landing was rough, the shutter skidding slightly before coming to a halt. The rear ramp hissed open, and medics rushed in, tending to the wounded. Ramirez stepped onto the deck, feeling the solid metal beneath his boots. He turned back to his squad. "We're not done yet," he said, voice firm. "This war's still going, and we've got a fight ahead of us." Vasquez smirked despite the pain. Carter exhaled, shaking his head. "I swear, you live for this, Sarge." Ramirez just smiled, looking out toward the void of space. The battle for Viestelia, South was over, but humanity's war was far from finished. The corridors of the Valor hummed with the quiet efficiency of a ship always on the edge of battle. Marines, engineers, and medics moved with purpose, their boots echoing against the steel floor. Sergeant Ramirez walked with his squad through the dimly lit passageway, the scent of burnt ozone and machine all thick in the air. Despite their exhaustion, none of them spoke of rest. They had survived the hell of Viestelia, South, only to find themselves thrown right back into the fire. Ahead of them, the war room doors slid open with a low hiss, revealing the towering holographic display of the ongoing battle. Around the massive table, officers and strategists argued in clipped, urgent tones. Admiral Graves stood at the head of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes flicking to Ramirez and his Marines as they stepped inside. "You fought like hell down there," Graves said, his deep voice carrying over the nose. "And you brought back valuable intel." The flickered, shifting to show an aerobator scan of the Syndicate fleet. Glowing red markers highlighted clusters of enemy ships forming a blockade around Viestelia, South. Vasquez crossed her arms, her face still peeled from blood loss. "Yeah, and we barely got out in one piece." Carter let out a dry chuckle. "And now we're heading right back into it, aren't we?" Graves nodded. "The Syndicate isn't retreating. They're digging in. If they fortify that blockade, we'll never break through. And Viestelia, South isn't just some colony, it's the only foothold we have in this sector. If we lose it, we lose everything." Ramirez exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "So what's the plan?" The zoomed in, highlighting a massive Syndicate dreadnought at the heart of the blockade. Its surface bristled with weapons, shields glowing ominously in the dark void. "We take that out," Graves said simply. "The Oblivion is their command ship. Cut off the head, and the rest of the fleet will scatter." The room fell silent. The Oblivion was a warship designed for planetary sieges, its armor thick enough to withstand aerobator bombardments. It wasn't just heavily armed, it was a fortress. Darius frowned. "You're asking us to take on that thing?" Graves' expression was grim. "I'm asking you to help. We're not sending you in alone. We have a plan." The shifted again, showing a series of infiltration routes leading toward the Oblivion's hangar bay. "A direct assault is suicide. But we have a weakness to exploit. A cargo transport is scheduled to dock within the next 2 hours. If we can get you inside, you'll disable their targeting systems, allowing the fleet to punch through their defenses." Ramirez exchanged glances with his squad. They had been through hell already, but this was a death sentence. And yet, no one refused. No one backed down. That was the thing about Marines. When the odds were against them, they held the line. Vasquez rolled her shoulder, wincing but smirking. Well, I always wanted to take down a dreadnought from the inside. Carter groaned. You're all crazy. Darius checked his rifle, nodding. Let's do it. Ramirez turned back to Graves. What's our timeline? You leave in 30 minutes. Graves straightened. Gear up. This van matters. Ramirez nodded, motioning for his squad to follow. As they stepped back into the corridor, the weight of the mission settled over them. No one spoke as they moved toward the armory, their steps heavy, their minds already preparing for what lay ahead. Inside the armory, racks of weapons and armor gleamed under sterile lighting. Ramirez ran his fingers over the familiar weight of his rifle, checking the magazine before slamming it into place. Vasquez strapped fresh plates onto her armor, rolling her shoulder to test mobility. Carter muttered under his breath as he checked his sidearm, his usual bravado tempered by the reality of their mission. Darius simply worked in silence, every motion precise, every movement deliberate. The final moments before battle were always the same. Quiet, tense, filled with the unspoken knowledge that this could be the last time they suited up. As they finished, Ramirez pulled his helmet on, the visor flickering to life with tactical readouts. All right, he said, was steady. We get in, we shut down their defenses, and we get out. No heroics. We stick to the plan. Vasquez smirked. Since when do we ever stick to the plan? Ramirez exhaled a chuckle. Fair point. Just try not to die, all right? The squad moved toward the waiting transport, the ship's engines already warming up. The pilot gave them a quick nod, but no words were exchanged. There was nothing left to say. As the transport lifted off, Ramirez watched as the Valor faded into the distance. Ahead, the Syndicate blockade loomed, a wall of steel and fire standing between them and victory. The Oblivion hung in the void like a sleeping beast, unaware of the hunters closing in. Ramirez tightened his grip on his rifle. They were Marines. They had survived worse. And if they were going down, they were damn sure going to make the enemy regret ever underestimating humanity. Hold the line, he muttered to himself. The Syndicate dreadnought Oblivion burned, its hull torn open by relentless human ingenuity and sheer stubborn will. Explosions rippled along its massive frame, secondary detonations shaking the ship as systems failed van by van. Inside, deep within the wreckage, Ramirez and his team fought their way toward the extraction point, the halls filled with smoke and the acrid scent of burning matter. Gunfire echoed, the sharp bark of human rifles meeting the shrieking plasma discharges of desperate Syndicate soldiers. They weren't supposed to have made it this far. The enemy had expected them to die before even reaching the core, let alone crippling the warship's targeting systems. Now, all that remained was the last stretch, getting out alive. Darius took point, his rifle cutting down two enemy enforcers before they could even react. We need to move, he shouted over the chaos, shoving a fresh magazine into his weapon. Carter was already at the junction ahead, planting explosives on the bulkhead door. This should buy us some time, he muttered, pressing the detonator. A moment later, a controlled blast sent debris flying, sealing off the corridor behind them. Syndicate reinforcements pounded on the other side, their guttural voices barking orders, but the humans had no intention of waiting around to see if they'd break through. Vasquez limped slightly, a plasma graze scorching her armor and burning deep into her side. She clenched her jaw against the pin, forcing herself to keep moving. Shuttle Bay is 2 levels down. How the hell are we getting there? Ramirez checked his display, scanning the rapidly updating map of the Oblivion's interior. Emergency maintenance shaft, he said, pointing to a service hatch embedded in the floor. It'll take us straight down. Faster than fighting through their kill zones. Carter wrenched the panel open and peered inside. A sheer drop into darkness. Well, that's just fantastic. No time for hesitation. Ramirez grabbed the cable on the side of the shaft, clipped himself in, and rappelled downward. The others followed, van by van, landing in the dimly lit lower deck. The ship groaned around them, another explosion tearing through the superstructure above. Syndicate forces were abandoning ship, retreating to escape pods, but some still fought to keep the humans from leaving. A patrol spotted them, and within seconds, the corridor lit up with weapons fire. Vasquez took cover behind a steel crate, returning fire as Darius flanked wide, picking off two of the enemy with precise busts. Carter lobbed a grenade downrange, the explosion sending a shockwave through the confined space, scattering bodies and leaving only silence in its wake. They didn't stop to admire their handiwork. Time was running out. The shuttle bay doors were ahead, looming like a beacon of salvation. Ramirez sprinted forward, slamming the console to override the lockdown. Come on, he muttered as the system processed the request. Behind them, more Syndicate soldiers stormed in, the last defendants of the dying warship. Darius and Vasquez laid down covering fire, keeping them pinned long enough for the doors to finally hiss open. Inside the bay, their shuttle sat waiting, its engines primed. A lone pilot, Lieutenant Hale, waved them forward. You guys sure took your time, he shouted over comms. Get in, we are leaving now. The squad sprinted toward the ramp as more enemy fire rained down. Carter took a hit to the shoulder, stumbling but pushing forward. Ramirez turned back, suppressing the enemy with a final barrage before yanking Carter up the ramp. The shuttle lifted off, banking hard as Syndicate defense turrets tried, and failed, to lock on. The Oblivion's targeting systems were dead, their mission a success. As the shuttle cleared the dreadnought's hull, the full scale of the battle came into view. The human fleet had broken through, Capita ships tearing into the disoriented Syndicate forces. The Valor led the charge, its main cannons punching through enemy lines with ruthless precision. The Oblivion shuddered beneath them, its structure collapsing in on itself, flames consuming what was left of the warship. Ramirez exhaled, slumping against the bulkhead. His armor was scorched, his muscles ached, and his lungs burned with the stench of battle. But they had done it. They had held the line, long enough for their people to break through. Vasquez leaned back, breathing heavily, a tired grin on her face. Well, that sucked. Darius chuckled, shaking his head. We lived. Carter winced, clutching his shoulder but smirking nonetheless. And we just took down a damn dreadnought. Ramirez glanced out watching as the Oblivion finally met its fiery end. He let out a slow breath before looking back at his team.